Welcome to Wizards of the Tower.
Roleplay.
This episode, we're going to be talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in RPGs. Welcome to Wizards of the Tower.
Roleplay.
And we're going to hit upon something that some people may not like, but we think it's important, so we're going to talk about it.
Yeah.
And that's diversity, equity, and inclusion in your RPG, in your RPG group,
right.
More specifically.
Yeah.
So back when I started playing Dungeons & Dragons in 1979, most of the people who played Dungeons & Dragons were the social outcasts. They were the nerds, the geeks, the brains. They weren't the athletic type typically. They didn't fit in with the partying crew. They didn't fit in with the cowboy crew or the hippie crew. So they were the outcasts. So they were this kind of unwanted people.
Yeah, I mean, it was like that in my high school too. I did not play RPG games. Now, I knew people who did. But it's true. They were essentially the computer nerds. This will kind of clue you in about how old I am. But when I was in high school, you could buy home computers that ran off cassette tapes. That's how you stored information. And they were very primitive games that people could play on those. And those kind of kids, they loved to play different kind of RPGs and games. And I would hear them talking about it, and they always seemed to have a copy of a token book under their arm, or they always seem to have some kind of a Dragonlance story or something tucked in their backpack. I certainly didn't have any hostility towards them because I was a book geek myself. I loved to read, and I always had a ton of books with me wherever I went. And, being into fantasy like Conan and Solomon Kane and writing and, stories like that, and also into art, which is I always loved to draw and sketch. I really was sort of on the periphery of that environment. So, schools can be really bad when it comes to cliques and when it comes to different groups and things like that.
Right.
And most people just feel lucky if they can somehow survive high school. And I know that a lot of people found kind of a family away from family in playing RPGs. It gave them something to focus on. It gave them a group to be with, someone who's like themselves. And it doesn't always have to be something having to do with the LGBT environment, although we're going to talk about that.
Right.
Back then, people were a lot more closeted when it came to their feelings and motivations and how they felt about themselves. But the RPG groups always seemed to have a place where people could, who normally wouldn't fit in or normally wouldn't belong in a lot of other cliques, they could belong there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a member of the LGBTIQ plus community, and Tom is a member of the Indigenous Native American community. So we are both in a minority group. But RPGs are our escape. I didn't fit in with the jocks, even though I played sports. And I didn't fit in with the cowboys, even though I grew up in a cowboy family. And I didn't fit in with the brainiacs because I wasn't, in the computer clubs and drama, anything like that. So I was kind of this outsider in all the cliques. But yet, I had my group of RPGers that were all part of that same. They didn't fit into a specific group.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was kind of my social spot where I would go. I wouldn't go party with everybody on the weekends in high school. So I would go and play Dungeons & Dragons or other RPGs with my friends.
Yeah, I mean, it gave people a place to focus on besides, partying a lot or abusing themselves with tons of alcohol or drugs. There's really no better drug in the world than using your imagination when it comes to an RPG game, that's for sure.
Yeah.
When we were more in school, it was still, D&D and RPG games were still almost like dirty words. You didn't hardly bring them up in public because one thing, the Satanic Panic,
right.
okay? all those kids who were getting in those games all worshiped the devil. And there were, weekly sermons in churches all over cities, warning parents to throw out the D&D books to make sure their kids weren't listening to heavy metal and playing that RPG, and have shirts with dragons on them. And that D&D was going to, Magic the Gathering was going to destroy society from the inside out and rot people and turn them all gay and everything like that. So D&D was still a really dirty word. In fact, it was really a dirty word up until just a few years ago.
Yeah.
When I started to notice people I would talk to at work who were slightly younger than me talking about their 5e and 4e characters at work, and I kind of cocked an ear over a little bit, and I was like, "What? Really? You guys are not too much younger than I am, but you guys have a D&D game going, or you have some kind of a game going, And it becomes, now as this generation is kind of maturing, we're taking a lot of the things that gave us pleasure as we were young, we're taking them with us. We're taking science fiction books, we're taking fantasy books, we're taking role-playing games, we're taking our music, we're taking our movies, our love for things like that. How else can you explain, in my opinion, the success of things like Stranger Things?
Right. Now, as a member of the LGBTIQ plus community, it was a way for me to escape who I was. And I know a lot of other people in that community that it allowed them to escape too, to be who they felt they should be or knew they should be.
Yeah.
But they couldn't be because of society putting the pressures onto them.
Yeah.
So it was a way for escaping and being who they knew they should be.
Well, sure.
And explore who they should be.
Yeah. I mean, I feel that a lot of people who feel that they're social outcasts or they feel like they're different than everybody else, should always have a place to go, always have a place to be, and where they can have friends like them. Again, and when we were younger, you never really knew much about people who were gay or LGBT. I use the word gay because that's my generation. Now, of course, it's queer or whatever you want to use. There were people who you kind of suspected who might be kind of, maybe a little different like that, maybe LGBT, but you didn't really know. And in my opinion, it was never really any of my business.
Yeah.
I never wanted to pry into people's lives. I found out later, after I graduated from high school, that a few of the guys that I knew had moved to other cities and moved in with other guys and formed relationships. And I was like, well, that kind of makes sense, because if I remember, he always was kind of doing this with his friends, and they liked this kind of music, and they were always doing this, and it kind of made sense. And it was, I think, really kind of like a role-playing game aspect, or any kind of games, can provide that outlet for people so they don't self-hate so much.
And a lot of the groups were very accepting. We didn't care about if you were Hispanic, or if you were Native, or you were Christian, or you were Baptist, or you were Republican or Democrat or whatever. We threw all that out the door, which is where it should stay, really, in all honesty.
Well, yeah, and I agree with you 100%. It's one of the two hard and fast rules that we have. Well, one of them. One of the main hard and fast rule we have in our group is no politics or religion is discussed at the table.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's to keep people, because we've had problems with that in the past, where people would get into fights and arguments about that. No politics or religion. If it comes up in a quip or a side note or a joke, we laugh it off and push it away as fast as we can. But that's really what it is. No politics or religion is discussed at the table. Okay?
Now, the thing is with RPGs in themselves are diversity, equity, and inclusion.
They are.
Why do I say that? You have humans, you have elves, you have dwarves, you have gnomes, you have halflings, you have half-orcs, you have tieflings. You have all these different races all working together and all being accepted into the group. And then there's the different classes. Somebody might be ultra rich, or their character might be ultra poor.
Yeah.
But we accept them into the group and play together as one group with a common cause, united to stop evil or to end the bad.
Yeah. You're talking about all sorts of different creatures, not creatures, but
races.
I mean, when I say
heritages.
Yeah, when I see creatures, I almost think of like tieflings and stuff like that. But you think of all these different heritages. You have elves and orcs, but importantly among all that, though, is you also have half orcs, half elves, half people, and there's never really any half dwarves.
No.
No, I don't think so. But half orcs and half elves are because you have attributes of both, and people like to play them a lot.
And most of them are outcasts from their own societies.
They are, and that's a very important point I think that we should bring up. Is most of them are sort of outcasts because they really are separate from their own societies one way or the other. Humans don't like to accept half elves because they think that half elves are haughty and they have these skills and that sort of thing. And of course elves would never accept a half elf because, well, they're half human and that sort of thing. And orcs are the same way, and half orcs. And it's an interesting thing when you can play a character like that and you can have success, in a game, and be the hero, and yet you still live in that kind of world. It's sort of like if a person is half African American, and they may be sort of lighter skinned or different complexioned, and they're not really accepted so much in like the white world, who sees them as still black or whatever. But yet sometimes in certain places in black culture, they may not look at someone who is very light skinned as being part of their culture too. So how do you fit in with a situation like that? Well, you can still play an RPG game and still see themselves as being, well, I'm part of this. I'm part of this game. Yep. I get to be the hero. I get to accomplish all this just because, even though I am who I am. I may not be accepted, but I get to do all these things.
Right. And the same would be for, people who are in the LGBTIQ+ community who are not accepted within their families.
Yes.
But yet they have friends that accept them.
Yeah.
So they're working together as a common cause. These people offer things. There are people in our society who have been in these communities who have offered great things to society.
Absolutely. I mean, our culture, you can you could probably say that a great deal of our entertainment culture derives from LGBT people working so hard, to create what we live in. The acceptance now of queer characters, of trans characters on TV and movies and music. I mean, I would never have thought from years and years ago that this would be the way it is. Now, of course, you could argue that we're regressing in a little bit, and we don't want to talk about that because that's really more politics. But I would never have thought that we had come this far, where a lot of people would be accepted in all these communities. And now bigots are called out. Back when I was a kid, bigots were laughed. It was like funny jokes. But now when someone creates a culture of hostility and bigotry, they're called out. And they really suffer for it, as they should.
Yeah. So within the RPG community, we have Janelle Jacques, who passed away recently, who was a writer and creator of dungeons. And there's the term of Jacques-ing a dungeon, which has now been taken over by the Alexandrian, calling it Xandering a dungeon. But Jacques-ing a dungeon was where there was more than one entrance in and out of a dungeon.
So can you explain to me a little more about that? When did that first... It used to be that a dungeon only had one way in and out of an entrance? Okay. So Janelle created a dungeon system, or a map system, that had more than one way to get into a dungeon? Is that
in and out, yeah.
Okay, so like escape hatches or different ways to get in?
Maybe down through caverns deep.
Okay.
Which is kind of interesting because I've been doing that for a long time, and it's just only recently that I found out, this term Jacques-ing a dungeon and what it meant, that it was more than one entrance in and out of a dungeon. So you don't have to go in through the front door. Maybe you come in through the caverns, or maybe you come in through a crack, or a well or something.
See, I express my ignorance in that sense because I had no idea that term existed.
Yeah.
But, and that sort of makes sense because a lot of the dungeons that you've made for our games always seem to have multiple exits and entrances, ways to get in and out. And I remember the Thieves Guild dungeon, which we played for like 5 sessions, man. I gotta tell you.
Well, there was the first one, Redstone Keep.
Well, okay, that's another one, yeah. But the Thieves Guild thing was enormous. Yeah. And thank God we didn't have to turn around and retrace our steps back through the whole thing. We found a way out through these big doors, and we had like an escape hatch. So that worked, and I understand what you mean. You told us later that there were other ways to get in and out, but we never found them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then you have, let's take Mike Pondsmith, who's black, African American ancestry, who created the game Cyberpunk.
Now, which Cyberpunk game?
It's the original board game, not the not the computer game.
Well, no, not the computer game, but so there was a Cyberpunk.
Well, there's Cyberpunk 2077, and I think there was an older one than that. But Cyberpunk 2077 is the newer version, and then they have the video game, which is based upon that. But Mike Pondsmith was the creator of the Cyberpunk RPG system.
Okay, wow, that's really, really interesting. I did not know that. It's kind of interesting when I try to think back to when I first heard the term cyberpunk. A lot of people trace it back to like William Gibson and writers like that, where you run into the cybernetic world and science fiction-y kind of world. And of course, for us, a lot of it has to do with the movie Blade Runner,
right,
which came out in like 1981 or 82. Mind-blowing movie when I first saw it. Utterly mind-blowing. I remember seeing it on 70 millimeter. Oh, man.
Yeah.
Utterly mind-blowing. For the settings, for the music, for everything in it. Everyone wanted to be Rick Decker.
Right, which is based upon the book Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?
Yes, but I remember reading the book after that and being very disappointed because the parts in the book, they just don't translate well into the movie.
Right, yeah.
So it's kind of like you take an original seed like this and then you grow it into an enormous tree. The tree is so different from the seed. They're part of it, but they're so different from the seed. Right. And that's kind of how I see when you have the book, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick, and the movie Blade Runner, who have written, the screenplay and everything, and of course Ridley Scott's vision. It's like, wow, this is just so different.
Right, but still, it's the cyberpunk environment.
Exactly. That's sort of when it's a cyberpunk aesthetic. Yeah. So let me ask you another question. So when did that first come out? When do you think Mike Pondsmith first came out with it?
I don't know when Cyberpunk. I was never a Cyberpunk player, but I think it was in the 80s is when it originally came out.
Okay.
I'll put it down below.
All right.
And then of course you've got a relatively new one. You got Connor Alexander, who created the RPG Coyote and Crow. Now Connor Alexander is of the indigenous Native American community. He's of the Cherokee tribe.
I don't know anything about Coyote and Crow.
I don't either. I was just digging for.
Well, we'll probably have to look into that. I mean, I think it's really interesting. There is not a lot of Native American representation in RPG, and at least as far as I know. I mean, I'm an Osage. Unfortunately, most of the people that I have contact with are very old, and they wouldn't know anything about RPGs.
Yeah.
Tribal contacts are very old, so RPGs, what's that? That kind of thing. Yet there are new aesthetics from indigenous people who are creating more comic books, more movies, more music. And more writers. There's got to be some other RPGs
I'm sure there is.
Game systems that are coming out from an indigenous point of view. When you think about it, there's a whole belief system. There's a whole legend and lore system in indigenous culture, not just in the United States, but in Mexico and Central America, South America, anywhere. Mm-hmm. There's an enormous indigenous culture to look at and use as source material for an RPG game. It just doesn't make any sense to leave it alone.
Which leads into the next name I was going to throw out, which is Miguel Angel Espinosa, who created a game called, I think it's Nahual, Nahual, which is a Native American Aztec-based RPG where you deal with shapeshifters and Aztec and Mayan culture.
Wow, I had no idea that existed.
I just dug that one up.
Wow, all right, so we're getting to see more lore-based games like that, and I really applaud that. I really do. Yeah. I mean, it's just, when I would talk to my friends and stuff, and they would always ask me, what are you? I was like, well, I'm an Osage. My dad's Osage. My mom's white. And they're like, what? And then it's like, I can't talk to you about it. I just don't know. I can't. That's the way it was for years and years and years. Only recently that we've become to start seeing stuff that is a lot more, kind of indigenous focused. But And there's another one thing I want to bring up, and I don't know if this really is part of our, what you would consider to be part of the culture. But when I talk about people who are handicapped or people who are, have certain sort of limitations, whether in mobility or that sort of thing.
And absolutely, because diversity, equity, inclusion does include the people who are handicapped, who have disabilities, whether they're blind or they have speech problems or hearing problems, or they can't walk, or maybe they have trouble walking, or maybe their hands, So yes, so the handicap is part of the diversity, equity, inclusion community, and having them in your group is a way for them to have their release.
Exactly.
And escape.
Yeah. So I would say a person with mobility issues, or a person who has low vision. Well, I have low vision. I've had it all my life. I mean, it makes it difficult for me to drive. I can't hardly drive at night. It makes it difficult for me to perform. I never could, participate in any sort of athletic games because my vision is not acute enough to keep an eye on balls or people's movement. These are very, very thick glasses. For me, my escape was always reading and movies to get away from that sort of thing. And everybody always accused me of being a bookworm or get my nose out of the book or that sort of thing. I can still be physically active by hiking or riding bikes, but I can't participate in so many things because I just can't see well enough.
Right.
I know a lot of people who may be experiencing mobility issues or issues with physical prowess or sort of things like that. RPG games can allow you to be the hero. You can be that active person. Yeah. You can be that person who does everything. You can be the swift ranger running through the forest.
Or even still, maybe you're still in your wheelchair.
Yeah.
And you're pulled by goats or whatever.
Something like that. I mean, there are RPG scenarios in role-playing game scenarios and gaming scenarios where all of that is certainly, part of it. I remember, you probably remember this too when I was a kid. Remember the movie Silver Bullet?
Yes, absolutely.
Where Gary Busey built his nephew that gasoline-powered motorized wheelchair to get around. Excellent movie, by the way. Very good movie. Great movie from the 80s, if you remember. It's about werewolves and about a priest who's a werewolf.
But it's the kid who's got the handicap issue who saves the day.
He saves the day. And the great thing about it is, it's a really good story. And it talks a lot about physical limitations. Yet someone can overcome those physical limitations. Not just overcome them, but to deal with them and to deal with the problems that they could give you in your life. Your sense of depression, your sense of anxiety. RPG community can often alleviate a lot of the sense of anxiety and depression that people feel. And even if people if you have issues with, anxiety and depression, a lot of times a good, solid, accepting RPG group can be like a second family where you feel like you can be yourself, or where you feel like you're supported, or it's a safe place. Delaney and I have always tried to make our group a safe place for anyone who has issues, and we've had a few people who've had some issues one way or the other. They haven't stuck around. I don't know why. I mean, we've always run our campaign as if it's a very accepting, very safe place, place for people to be, to feel wanted. And so I think RPGs can do that, and I believe that really does fit in the DEI community. How the two RPGs and DEI communities can fit together, and kind of mesh this and create a second family for people who need it.
Yeah, allowing somebody who is of a different community, different belief into your group is really a great way to learn a lot of things.
Yes.
To open your mind and to expand your acceptance of things in the world. The world wasn't always the most accepting place, and it's still not the most accepting place. But a gaming group is a great place to be a start for accepting people who are different.
Exactly.
Who may not fit into societal norms.
Yeah.
Who may have lost their family or whatever because of who they are or who they needed to be or their belief system.
Mm-hmm. And I think, in a sense, a lot of it is because people like community. Human beings are community-oriented people. We used to, thousands of years ago, we lived in tribes and villages where everybody took care of everybody else. And we still have that inside our DNA.
Yeah.
We're not isolated. We don't really work as isolated loners. That's why one of the greatest punishments you could ever do to somebody was to exile them. And basically, when you exiled people, a lot of times they just died because they couldn't fend for themselves, and they were away from their families, they were away from their friends, they were away from their support groups. Now we live in a world where it's seemingly people are permanently exiled from each other a lot of times, and so they seek community, and so we need community to build, to support, in people in their hard times, and so the DEI community and RPG groups can do that, can be someone's support when they need it.
Yeah, absolutely. With the way society is trying to yank away DEI, this is a great way to expand DEI.
Yeah.
And bring it into to your group and be accepting of anybody who is of a different community than yourself or a different belief than yourself, because that's what RPGs are all about.
Yeah.
Bringing together a group of individuals who are different, whether they're human or elf, or they're male or they're female, or they follow this god or that god, or whatever class they are, and bringing together everybody for a common cause of overcoming an obstacle.
Yeah, solving a mystery.
Because, as the saying goes, the village is only as strong as its weakest member.
Yeah, yeah.
And if you allow everybody in and accept them, you make a stronger village.
Yeah.
And a stronger team.
It allows people to work together toward a common goal, to use strategy and tactics, to use problem solving, to solve the mystery, to overcome the occurrence, to defeat the villain, that sort of thing.
Right.
Everybody of different backgrounds, and so that's why, in my opinion, and Delaney's opinion also, that's why diversity works in the RPG community.
Right. So I think we're going to end this episode of Wizards of the Tower.
Roleplay.
Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, spread the word, ring the bell. Follow us on Discord. We'll put the Discord link right down here. And please, if you're going to leave a comment, please only positive comments. We don't want your negative, bad, disparaging comments on this. We know not everybody's accepting of this and everyone's belief, but if you don't like it, just turn your cheek the other way and walk away. So anyway, may all your adventures be epic.
And keep on rolling.
Thanks.